This is Lama Tantrapa, and I want to thank you for your interest in the secrets of Qigong Masters. You are at the right place if you want to learn from some of the best experts in our field how to tap into the energy resources that will help you achieve greater vitality, personal power, improve the quality of your life, and experience self-realization. I encourage you to dive deeper into these teachings by exploring the additional resources provided by this and other amazing guests of our show. Please visit qigongmasters.com, where you'll find a treasure trove of information and materials dedicated to empowering you to live your dreams.
Today, I'm honored to introduce to you a well-known Qigong master, Bruce Kumar Frantzis, who studied with O-sensei Morihei Ueshiba, the founder of Aikido, between 1967 and 1969, at the Aikido headquarters in Tokyo, Japan. It was his first in-depth experience with a top-level master of internal martial arts who was able to manipulate Qi powerfully and subtly. When Bruce was in Tokyo, another old man appeared while he was practicing his martial arts. When they started sparring, it was obvious that he was a high-level master. 10 years later, when Bruce was living in Taiwan, he was told that the man had been sent with specific instructions to begin teaching Bruce Qigong Tuina. By then, Bruce Frantzis has become an accomplished Qigong doctor who had worked on thousands of patients in Chinese hospitals with problems ranging from broken bones to nerve and organ damage. Years later, he also worked with cancer patients. When he was 32 years old, he had a car accident which resulted in massive injury to his spine. Although he wondered whether or not he'd be able to go and do martial arts again, he healed himself using Qigong, Tai Chi, and Taoist meditation techniques. In 1982, Bruce Kumar Frantzis was given a letter of introduction to his most eminent teacher, the Taoist lineage master Liu Hongqian, who accepted him as his student. Master Liu completed Bruce's training in the martial and healing methods of Bagua, Tai Chi, Qigong therapy, and Tuina. Not only did he train Bruce in the water method of Taoist meditation, but even passed down his lineage to Bruce, which is directly linked to the Lao Tzu, the author of Tao Te Ching. I am glad to hear that you found a moment to share your wisdom and your knowledge with our readers. Welcome, Bruce, to the Secrets of Qigong Masters radio talk show.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. And there are some of the people from your audience who've asked some questions, and so what I'll try and do is just explain them, and then, we'll probably have phone-ins or whatever happens. One question is, are the energy arts you teach the same as Qigong? Many people are not aware that Qigong is a bit like saying electricity. It's the actual energy work, and there are many ways in which it's used. Qigong Tuina, for example, is used for healing, and that's an energy art because they're arts of Qi or energy. Meditation is, martial arts is, the ability to actually do things to affect people's minds are, all the transmission abilities in meditation are based upon that. So the generic term in Taoism is Qi Shu, which is actually what energy arts means. And so you have all these divisions. Now, internal martial arts is only one division of the Qi work in Taoism. Most people internal martial arts classically was really about fighting. It was like taking Qi and using it to its most extreme levels in terms of any form of physical combat, and they had specific methods within it, of which I teach a lot of those. Mm-hmm. However, now there's also a whole another contingent of people who do internal martial arts rather than strictly with what is called Qigong, and they do it basically as a form of Qigong, and either for their health or else they do it to give them the energy to do some sort of energetic healing work. How did I get involved with Taoism? Completely by accident. I was involved in martial arts. As a matter of fact, I didn't even know what Taoism was. And my first teacher in Taiwan, Wang Shijing, it happened to have been that through a whole bunch of reasons, he liked me, and we had kind of like a grandfather-grandson relationship. And the next thing I know, he got me initiated into one of the secret groups within Taoism, and from that, I ended up spending 7 years going through a Taoist priesthood training. So I became a Taoist priest, a Taoist, whatever you call it, like a lama in Buddhism or something. there were all sorts of divisions within that, which also go back to Qi energy arts. It wasn't just martial arts, of which, that was one part of it. It wasn't just all sorts of original Taoist Qigong methods, of which that was a major study. There was also the study of sexuality in terms of just Qi movement, but also in terms of meditation. There was a study of exorcisms. There was how to bring about birth. There was how to pass people between life and death. I mean, it was what you would in the West would call very deep esoteria, except to Taoists, that is just what they do. So it's fairly normal within that type of thing. So much of what would be considered to be giant secrets everywhere else is just, well, no, this is just the program. A bit like if you were to go to MIT and they were to talk about some really small area of quantum physics, it wouldn't be esoteric. It would just be, well, no, that's part of the physics department. So one issue is that a lot of questions come up is that what makes one a master in these disciplines? I think that's a very funny thing, because in America, the definitions in China and the definitions in America are not quite the same. In America, you can get known as being a master simply because you have a good PR department. Enough publicity, you can claim anything. But usually in China, there are two ways in which people get pretty much considered to be masters. One is that by their peers, by people within the field who, whether it be martial arts or it be healing or something, by the top people in the field saying, this person really knows what they're doing. The second way is that there's a whole disciple lineage way of going down, that it goes from one person to the next generation, but within that, you don't get recognized as a master unless the person who came before you recognizes you as a master. So it's not as though you self-recognize yourself as being the genius in physics. Someplace like MIT has to give you a PhD or something like that.
Right. So in other words, there is a certain hierarchy that one has to obey and follow.
The obeying and the following may be part of it, but there are people whom actually have the ability to rather unambiguously judge if you know what you're doing or not. See, if you have someone, for example, who's blind, then their opinion upon whether a person is a good painter might not be worth a whole lot. Whereas if you have a person who can see quite well and they happen to be a fairly recognized painter, then they might be in a better position to say whether you know what you're doing. So it's a question of the recognition comes from being recognized by people the insiders who actually know what it is you're doing. See, they have a phrase in Chinese that's called neihang and waihang. And a neihang is somebody who's an insider. So when they look at something, they don't see the tricks. They actually see, what's going on. Then you have a waihang who really doesn't know what's going on, and a waihang is always susceptible to being tricked.
Yeah, outsider. In Qigong, probably there is also some degree of recognition that comes from efficacy of your practice. For example, if you practice healing Qigong and you can't heal anyone, and you're sickly yourself, then probably claiming that you are a Qigong master will not go very far, because it will just sound really inauthentic.
That goes back to peer review. For example, someone could be sick and get hurt, and they could heal themselves, but who knows, it might just be a one-off. Usually when you're talking about that, if you get recognized by the people in the game who know what they're talking about, you haven't done this to one person. You've done this to hundreds or thousands. And it's recognized that you have a serious track record. So I realize that, there's a tendency with things like Qigong to want to make it very esoteric and mysterious, or else to raise it to what I call the great man. Oh, this person did something great, therefore they must be a master. But in China, the standards are a lot harder than that, because anybody can get a one-off. It's more the fact that they keep on doing it and doing it and doing it. A bit like the Energizer Bunny. It just keeps on going and it keeps on producing the results.
So there is some consistency in results.
There is consistency in results, and there are consistency in results that are recognized by people who know what they're looking at. As I said, if for example, I'll give you a good one in Beijing. When I was there was this person who was saying, they were Qigong healer, right? And they were looking at people and X-ray eyes, and they were seeing everything that was going on with them. Well, this person for about 3 years was he's even getting things in the papers and being a big thing. But they have a division, at least at that time in the Chinese government, that went out and found charlatans. that actually investigated them, and the people who were doing that were real professionals in the field. I mean, they were people who really knew what they were doing. So anyway, this guy did his line of whatever, which had fooled more people than you can count. But then the pros actually started looking at him, and he spent the next 10 years in jail. That wouldn't happen in America. In America, if you had a good PR department, it actually wouldn't matter whether you knew something or not.
If you don't know what you're doing, but you're presenting it in such a way that everybody goes, wow, that sounds really intriguing, or that's just a really good return on investment. You know, if you do like a whole weekend workshop for $99.
That's a market economy. A market economy is that if you can sell it, it's good. But what I'm saying is that in China, I mean, there may be elements of that, but there's also the fact that, you know, this is a very old tradition, and there are a lot of people around who know what they're looking at. Whereas, you know, the United States, you don't have many people who know what they're looking at. So in America, it very often comes down to, well, did I like this person? Did he give me a good vibe? Did I get a good feeling from him? And think about if you applied that to your mechanic. Well, I got a great vibe from this guy. I got a great feeling from him. Oh, but my car blew up. And so, whereas if you had someone, well, it's great to get a good vibe from the person. I mean, I would much rather have a service provider who's a really nice guy and a sweetheart. But then there's the question of, you know, can his actual real abilities, his technical abilities, or whatever you want to call that, as it applies to the person who's going to use them, you know, does it do the thing? So, I mean, that's where, when you talk about a master, when you have real lineages, nobody gets to be a lineage master without having gone through being vetted more times than you can possibly count, and being vetted by people who, you know, as I said, really know what they're talking about.
Besides that, there is also the notion of a master in terms of a teacher, in terms of a person who imparts knowledge on students. Well, so perhaps those people who are looking for a teacher may indeed need to feel the vibe, so to speak. They may be looking for a teacher who they resonate with.
One of the wonderfulnesses about America is that many people are educated, and they actually have the ability to use a discriminating mind. So we can look at this from a few perspectives, which I think pretty much make it very straight. First of all, if you go to somebody and they make you feel downright horrible and lousy, the more, even if they're the best in the world, more likely than not, your internal resistance to what they're doing means you can't learn from this person. But then again, you could go to someone who makes you feel the best in the world, and if all you're looking for is a good social interaction, well, you got it. You know, and if the people in the class give you a good vibe, well, if your interest was in recreation, you're having a good time, you're having fun, what else to say? I mean, that's what you came for, that's what you got. But if you're looking to actually learn something, there needs to be at least some minimal level of neutrality, and all the way up to they make you feel great, so you don't have any resistance to what they're doing. But then it starts coming down to, do they actually know what they're teaching you? I mean, if you had a person who only had a first-grade education and you want to learn about Shakespeare, they could make you feel great. The odds are, 5 years later, you still wouldn't be able to, you know, read Romeo and Juliet. Whereas you could have somebody who was probably the best Shakespearean, you know, professor in the world, but they made your skin crawl so much you wouldn't want to listen to a word they said. So again, you would have gotten nothing. You're looking to find whatever that mix is, whatever that balance is for you, that whatever vibe, whatever feeling they're giving off is good enough for you that you really can get into what they're doing. And then the question is, well, I mean, how far do you want to go? I mean, you know, there is a very big difference between an MIT professor, just using it because it's a well-known school, or Harvard professor in some very esoteric subject, and the guy at your local community college. How are you going to learn something at the end of the day when you get past a certain point by someone who doesn't really know what it is? That becomes a problem. And that's always been a very big thing in the Chinese arts, because a lot of teachers are very secretive. And so what the old way that they put it in China was this. The first thing is that, does the person actually know the subject? Do they really know what it is in and out, blah, 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 blah. The second one is, can they teach it? Some people are brilliant practitioners, but frankly speaking, they couldn't teach you to tie your shoelaces if their life depended upon it. So there's the one, and some people are not very good practitioners, but they can teach people incredibly well.
To the extent that they know it.
Yeah, to the extent they know it, but so there's somewhere the mix between how much do they know, how deep do they know it, how well do they know it, and then the second is, how well can they impart it? So on a scale of 1 to 10, some people have knowledge at 10 and teaching ability at 1. Some people have teaching ability at 10 and knowledge at 1. The old thing of the old masters was the ability to find someone who had the best of those together. And then now there's one other issue. If you're dealing in any sort of energy art, something that deals with Qi, now you have the question of how strong is their Qi? Because some people actually can just literally, you can get it almost by osmosis if their field is strong enough. Masters very commonly have incredibly strong fields. Ordinary people have fairly weak fields. But then again, if you had someone who had a super strong field, but you can't pick up what they're doing even though it's in the room, you might be better off with someone who is just adequate in terms of Qi, but a really good communicator, because that's the way you learn. So the learning and the teaching and the competence, there's this flow that goes between them, so there's not a hard and fast answer about any of it.
And now let's continue with exploring the history of your school, Bruce. Would you share with us how it came about?
The history of my school is that I studied for 25 years, pretty much full-time, non-stop. And before I met my main teacher in Beijing, I had 20 years of experience where I had studied with a number of really, really top people, and I was what they called the young master in Taiwan and Hong Kong. And then I met this person who held some of the most direct and tightest lineages I had ever seen in my life.
What do you mean by tightest lineage?
Well, you have people who, a tight lineage means is somebody really determined to know something tightly, to know it very clearly, precisely, without holes, without anything. Liu Hongjie they have 3 types of masters in China. They have the people who, just are kind of ordinary and teach a lot of students. Then they have the people they call the famous stars, who are like most people would say, wow, that's like the big, giant, famous master. And then you have the people who were people like that, and they call the people that don't come out in public. And they have, maybe 10 times the knowledge and skill of the big, famous masters. But they're incredibly hard to get into. Well, I went through the whole ladder. I went through ordinary people. Then I went to the famous masters. For example, Ue Shiba that you mentioned would be classified as a famous master. But I also studied with people who were at his level or above also, many of them. So I went through then the ordinary famous star masters, if you want to call it. But then I got to spend 3 to 6 hours a day for 3.5 years studying one of the people who doesn't come out. So he was very unusual. He was a direct lineage holder from Lao Tzu, meditation. He was in the direct line of very close to the founders of one major Tai Chi style,
Which one?
The whole thing in Xingyi and Bagua, as well as he was a master of Taoist medical Qigong. So very direct, because he came from a family of 10 generations of Chinese doctors. So when he studied Qigong, let's say, he came into it with a good appreciation for it. And he taught me all these things. And so when I was with him, I would have to say, if I thought about my previous 20 years of experience, I was learning more with him every month than I had been literally in the past 20 years.
And you're speaking of the master Liu Hongjie?
Liu Hongjie, yeah. He was what in China they call a Taoist immortal. There's not many of them.
And by Taoist immortal, you don't mean that he never died, do you?
No, they have what they call, what in Buddhism they would call a living Buddha. Not a bodhisattva, but a living Buddha.
Living Buddha. Well, I have not heard of living Buddha, other than in some claims of people who call themselves living Buddhas.
You may not have heard of it, but then, I don't know if you speak Chinese either. The Chinese term is huohuo. They have in Buddhism people they consider to be bodhisattvas, and they have people, very, very rare ones, to become Buddhas. On a spiritual level, the people who become Buddhas in Taoism are known as immortals. And there's very few of them. It's not like there's a lot of them. There's really very few of them.
Right.
So anyway, as I said, basically, I spent 11 years in China studying morning, noon, and night. Before that, I spent 3.5 years in Japan, 2 years in India, and before that, I had, I was kind of a up-and-coming rising young star in America.
You spent some time in Taiwan as well, no?
Well, Taiwan's part of China, yeah. I spent 5 years there. I mean, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and the mainland are all China. They just, in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, they kind of belonged to different time warps. And each of them had different political systems, but I wouldn't even say it was the political systems. I would say they belonged in different centuries. That would actually be closer to the truth.
Right. And so most of your studies you've done on mainland China or in Taiwan?
I spent when I was the quote-unquote young master stage, that was 7 years when I became a Taoist priest in Taiwan, Hong Kong. And everything I learned in Chinese. I didn't learn English. I mean, I just have had dramatically more background than most people you'll run into, just as a point of fact. And because of it, there's more details than you can possibly believe.
By the way, our listeners are also welcome to look at the books. We have Bruce Kumar Frantzis' books on our website, blogtalkradio.com/QigongMasters. And if you look at the first on top, the interview with Bruce Kumar Frantzis, just click on that name. It will take you to the collection of the books by this man. So you're welcome to check him out. He is a wonderful writer. I've read at least a couple of his books and thoroughly enjoyed them. High-level demonstration of knowledge and expertise in energy arts. By the way, speaking of books, would you share with us a little bit about your not most recent, but one of the most recent books, the Qi Revolution? What does it mean by Qi Revolution?
Well, I think that my own personal experience, my own personal, let's say, opinion, is that the West is currently suffering from a serious disease, and I call it malaise. That the sense of life, the sense of actually engaging with life, the sense of realizing what life is coming out of any interaction, which is Qi, is something that's really not in the West, and we've gotten to the point where, let's just say, our fantasies or our identities or material goods have become so predominant. So anyway, what this book is about is just two things. The first one is that it was just simply trying to give, for an average person, for your grandmother, for anybody, some introduction to it. Because some of my other books are actually really primarily for people who are in the game. You know, like I wrote a book, The Power of Internal Martial Arts, which is like 300,000 words, and it's you know, it's just not light, fluffy reading, but it, you know, has a lot of meat to it.
That's one of the books I actually read and enjoyed.
Yeah, my 8th book is coming out in a month, and that's the Tao of Letting Go, which shows Lao's basic method of meditation. So as I said, you can go on my website, energyarts.com, and you know, you can go on to the mailing list, and you know, you get whatever free stuff, you know, people give, which seems to be American culture, and all these things, and then tell you about what's going on. And I have a book that's coming out about Bagua, both in terms of not so much about its martial arts, which I kind of did in The Power of Internal Martial Arts, but the I Ching tradition of Bagua that was part of the Taoist monasteries for 4,000 years, which I have to say that the whole time I was in Taiwan, Hong Kong, I mean, I was trying to find that like nobody's business, and it was only in the mainland with Liu that I met one of the few people who actually knew it. You know,
Bagua.
Yeah, Bagua. That's the I Ching. There actually is a very, very specific energetic and spiritual practice that is directly tied to the I Ching. There is also a martial art called Bagua Zhang that is probably one of the best in the business, but the thing is that it took some of those principles and then applied it to a lot of fighting techniques. But there's actually the core energetic and spiritual practice. And this book is going into a lot about that. It also gives the foundation for anyone who does martial arts. I mean, if they want to do internal martial arts, I think there's only one thing that's true, as well as if you really want to learn Qigong or anything. The stronger your basics, the stronger the building you'll build, the farther you'll go. The great tendency in America is always to want to jump from this to this in accumulation. But it's actually the solidity, it's actually the strength of the most fundamental stuff that allows you eventually to get the greatest abilities. I think there's not even a maybe about that.
I would concur. We know that without the foundation, it's hard to build a building. And if you're learning an art, whatever art that is, if there is not enough foundational training, then developing much of an advanced art form out of it will be very difficult.
But going back to Qi Revolution, which you asked, it takes a lot of things at a relatively easy to understand level, you know, about the base of Taoism, the things about Qi. So one of the big reasons I wrote is I truly do believe that if people would start considering the nature of the flow of life that comes in things that they do, I think that's the way out of the spiritual malaise box. I think that will make people dramatically happier in life, because it's life itself that makes people happy and satisfied. It's not the reflections of it, it's not the symbols of it that make people happy and satisfied. It's the actual sense of life itself. And that's basically what Qi is. So, I think it's nicer to be more alive than more dead. Let's just say I hold that personal opinion. But there's also other things in it. There's some simple exercise that come from a very important form of Qigong, which is Dragon and Tiger, which was used to heal cancer back in the 80s and had about the best track record for that in the game. And there's some simple exercises that go for it, and there's things about, where does this go in meditation. And it finishes in the end looking in terms of Qi and karma, and what the spiritual practice, what the spiritual reality of using Qi as a way to get there, what that might be about. But it's a very easy read book. It was written specifically for that purpose.
What's the name of the book about Qi and karma again? Well,
the end of it's in that. That's the Qi revolution.
Oh, I see. Okay.
The revolution is to have a revolution in your life and everybody around you. I'm not talking about blowing buildings up. I'm talking about changing. If people would just get into the sense of life and Qi, they would start changing everything around them. There's no two ways about it.
No doubt. And when we look at the way that we can transform our lives, what would you say about the way that Qigong and energy arts in general would be able to assist us in making our lives fuller, more satisfying, and also perhaps more enlightened?
I think you would have to take it from 2 points. I think the full and satisfying is a different thing than the enlightened. Because I think that's a subject of meditation, not Qigong. I mean, Qigong is in terms of Taoist meditation at least, Qigong is early doors. It's primary school. It is not high school or college or graduate school. But it's I guess like playing poker, it's the ante that gets you into the game, it's the ticket that gets you into the movie house. I would say that at one very simple reason, and something I did for 20 years going everywhere, is that it'll make a person more healthy and it'll make their body feel more alive rather than more dead. So I think that's a pretty big thing. I think being a walking corpse is not necessarily the way to go. Another thing about it is that it will allow you to start feeling what's inside of you. Most people can't feel below their skin. They can't feel the energy that's running through their body. They can't feel the deeper things that are inside them. So they have a very external view toward the world, almost like everything's external to them. Well, when you get the ability to start waking up the inside of your body, the ability to feel it, then that starts waking you up to connecting to everything around you, period. Because if someone is dead to their insides, the odds of them being very alive to their outside is not very good. So the more you become alive inside, the more likely you're able to become more alive with the environment you live in. And then you take it further if you then start getting involved with Qi and your insides start waking up. At some point, you start seeing what fundamentally inside you is not working terribly well. For example, people have ghosts and demons. People have psychological issues. People have problems from the time their childhood, their parents, their this, their that. Well, the Taoist method of meditation uses Qi to unravel those things and make them finished, resolved. So in that one sense, that then leads and that starts moving you into meditation. And as you go further, the fact is that the whole universe is filled with Qi, and it creates incredible space. And if you can tap into that Qi enough, the space of the universe starts becoming very obvious to a person. And that makes a person just feel incredibly free. Satisfying, I think that's too cheap a word. I think it's just that limitations from the sense of just existing start dropping away. And I think that leads to, at some point, a person recognizing what the actual spiritual force is inside them. In Taoism, we call it the wonderful accident. And you just accidentally, you all of a sudden see what the force of real spirituality is inside yourself. And I think that for a lot of people, if they actually have a personal, visceral experience of that, then they decide they want to play and get involved. So that's the beginning of the road toward using the word enlightenment.
Okay. And so as you get on the journey of enlightenment, I suspect that there is some profound connection that you wrote about in that book, Qi Revolution, because it sounds like there is a connection between Qi and karma. Would you share a little bit about it?
Well, karma is effectively Well, first of all, at one level, karma is a form of chi. But on another level, in order for karma to activate, there has to be some sort of energy in a situation, in something, that all of a sudden draws you to and makes you engage with it. And if you have the ability to start recognizing that energy, that goes to like where my next book is about, which is Lao-Tzu's basic method of meditation, is how to release bound energy. Just period, how to release it. Well, if you can recognize it and you can release it, you can release the karma. And for a lot of people, it is a lot nicer to consciously be able to release your karma than to have to go through it. Because there's a lot of karma that people have that, frankly speaking, that when it activates, where, for example, the phrase used in Buddhism, secondary causes, something has to be in the environment to activate it. Karma doesn't exist in a vacuum. That,
Right.
Makes them very unhappy.
So it sounds to me that you identify certain energies as good and certain energies as bad.
Good and bad, I think, has no meaning, but I do believe that in terms of functionality, in terms of what they do to you, in terms of the common perception, sure. I mean, let's put it this way. Is it good or is it bad that you get shot? But if you're shot, who knows, on that day, because you got shot by some, little fool in the leg or something, you didn't end up going across town where you would have been in a car accident and died, so it was a good thing. Now, then again, getting shot a good thing? I don't know about that. So you're talking about the way people ultimately, as you get further into Taoist meditation, I mean, it's a simple thing. If you take the I Ching and you look at all the changes around the I Ching, that's how everything changes, but the center of the I Ching is empty. From the point of view of the center of the I Ching, which is the spiritual side of the I Ching, there is no such thing as good or bad. If you talk from a relative point of view of everyone living a life, things function in certain ways. And we have a tendency to call some things good because we like the way they affect us and they like the function they do, and we call some things bad because, frankly speaking, if you had a choice, you wouldn't ask for it. You'd want to get rid of it. But the whole meditation procedure is to kind of release all that stuff so you can get beyond these little games.
Mm-hmm. And perhaps realize that if you're one with the universe, after all, where are you going to throw away that bad energy?
You can't throw it away. All you can do is release it. I mean, if energy releases sufficiently, it becomes unbound. Energy that is unbound, in a very, very simple way of putting it, does not cause any problem. When energy gets bound, depending upon the way it gets bound, it can cause problems. Now, whether those problems make you feel wonderful or make you feel badly depends upon how it's bound. And it also depends upon what phase of the cycle it happens to be in. Things that start off good end up bad. Things that end up bad, things that start off bad end up good.
So that's the yin and yang exchange.
Usually, things just change. But if you can actually, at a spiritual level, let me put it this way. From what I understand from all my years in the East and having meditated basically since I've been a child, that if anybody has a method of releasing their karma, that is one of the primary gifts you get given living on this planet. And so if you can engage with that, a lot of what this earth has to teach an individual can be learned.
We have a caller with a question. What's your name?
My name is Ramon.
Hi, would you like to ask us a question?
Actually, I'm a big fan of Mr. Frantzis, and I even purchased the Tai Chi book actually a few years ago.
I hope you enjoyed it.
I did enjoy it. In fact, I actually still have it, and it's a constant study for me. But as for questions, right now I'm just listening. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
You're welcome. Bruce, would you mind sharing with us a little bit about your secrets of mastery? You are a very well trained and very well received Qigong expert in America. What makes you so successful?
One question a lot of people ask is, can these disciplines help with addressing the health crisis? Tai Chi and Qigong, because when it was a big thing in the 50s and the 60s and 70s, a lot of times what was called Tai Chi actually was Qigong. It was just called that because Qigong was illegal and Tai Chi was okay. That's a really weird thing Mao Zedong had. But basic basically saved the Chinese healthcare system, because I wrote about this in my first book, Opening the Energy Gates, where I had one of the people when I was first learning acupuncture from him back in the early 70s. He was a doctor in Tianjin in China, and he used to have a thing where there would be 400 people who would want to come to his, office every day in the hospital. Now, obviously, you can't see 400 people. It's physically impossible unless you just want to blink at each one of them. But what they did is they had somebody, and they would triage him, and if it didn't look like, they were imminent danger of something happening within the next 2 weeks, they would send him to a local Tai Chi person, give him a card, and the person had to check off that they had done it every day, and then said, after you use for 3 months, you can come back and we'll, see you. Fact of the matter is that 95% of the people, just by doing that, got better from whatever it was they had.
They probably had some psychosomatic issues.
I don't think it was just psychosomatic. Having been a Qigong Tuina doctor, you can use Qigong and Tuina to heal an insane number of diseases. I'm talking about people who are coming in who are like, in really bad shape. Oh, I'm quite sure 20 or 30% of that crowd was psychosomatic, but you have to realize back in that era, you did not lightly go to a hospital because you didn't know if you were going to end up having to talk to your local Gestapo person for whatever reason on the face of the sun. People were terrified of anything that was official. We're talking about one of the most fascist scenes that's ever existed on the earth. But they just found people got better, and this was replicated all over China. So I believe that, and I've had so many students who've had more diseases than you can possibly count. They do Tai Chi or they do Qigong for a while. And if you show them how it's done medically, rather than just waving your arms in the air and doing a couple of physical movements, but you actually teach them what channels are doing what, how they're actually trying to make the flows happen inside their body, people just get better. And I think it could actually seriously dent the health crisis we're going in, because, the biggest single thing is that if you can reduce the number of people who have a lot of things that never have to get really badly ill, that at least saves whatever medical resources are going to exist for people who really need it. And, the system is snapping. I mean, I saw this 20 years ago, and it's only going to get worse.
A lot of people with psychosomatic issues.
There are a lot of people who take drugs, but then again, there's a lot more that don't. I mean, if you're talking psychosomatically, I actually have not found that Tai Chi affects those people or Qigong affects those people all that much, because what they usually do is find a way to spin the Tai Chi or Qigong into some sort of dramatic neurotic impulse. But if you get people who have something for real, they get better. So, that was my experience, and that was my experience having been a doctor and having watched, more thousands of people than I really want to think about how they were sick and they got better. And I think this is, in that sense, it's a dramatically powerful form of yoga, and I hope it really takes off in the West, because I think it could really make a dent in the health crisis. But that's, I wrote a PhD, and I actually wrote rather extensively on the subject. But the fact is that I hold that opinion. But I'll go back to what the question was before, because I think that's a very important thing I just said, because, forget about you do Tai Chi or Qigong and you're going to become some spiritual Superman, or you're going to be able to jump over buildings in a tall bound by becoming a Superman. It's a wonderful thing for your health. And it's not the same as normal sports, because if you learn it from someone who actually has any idea about how Qi flows really work, you're really talking about a medical form of exercise. You're talking about where Chinese medicine meets physical exercise. And so I think it's a rather unique thing in the world.
And if it is a sport, if it is something that you do for an entertainment value, it may actually be quite substantial, because it may become a profound study of peak performance and how to use your energy in the most effective ways.
Oh, sure.
I've worked with many athletes who become much more successful as athletes.
They use Tai Chi and Qigong in the sports teams of China mostly to speed their reaction time, heal injuries, because athletes get injured all the time, and to just increase their internal coordination abilities. I mean, I've trained professional athletes when I was younger, and a lot of them. And sure, there was one time, for example, I had a guy who was like a top golf pro. I increased his drive 15% in under a month and a half. And the thing is that I didn't know anything about golf, but I did know how internal flows in the body work. So yeah, I mean, it's multifactorial. There's no two ways about the fact that there's an amazing number of aspects. But I think that the health thing is there are way more people who want to be healthy than people who want to perform well. And high performance people always suck all the oxygen out of any room they're in. Because, it's the line between wanting to be high performance and just wanting to have an ego that will infinitely expand is a very thin one. At least I've seen that in my whole life. But the original thing that I believe you asked before, so I went off on this tangent, was that, what was it?
About mastery. Since the name of our radio talk show is The Secrets of Qigong Masters, I wanted to ask you, what is your secret? Or if you have more than one.
A lot of hard work. I would say that the secret, I think it was just two things. I think it was an exceptional amount of hard work and an exceptional education. I mean, I was very fortunate to be with people who walked the talk and, really knew what they were doing and were what you want to call about as good role models as you can get. And whatever they said to do, I went and did it. But there's one more thing that goes with that it was also the ability to practice by myself, because the highest levels of Qigong, any way you want to slice it, always come from practicing by yourself. They don't come from being in a class. They don't come from being in a group. They come from, that's a good thing, and you learn things there and you get into it, but it's when you actually go inside and you really take on the struggle of what's happening inside me and what is possible to do here and do I want to do it. And something I know that, because I get asked this question by more people than count, the one thing that I've found, especially with Americans, less with Europeans, but still it's similar, is that you have to get whatever it is for you that overcomes the boredom factor. And I mean it by this. Okay, you do something and you're practicing, and I don't care how talented you are, I don't care how wonderful you are, even if you're at the absolute top of the genetic pool, that you're going to go through periods where it's going to seem like nothing's happening. And the hardest thing to do is to realize that this is a stage when your internal infrastructure is solidifying. It's like all the little, as a metaphor, all the little pipes in the building that aren't connecting, the water's not going through, they're basically there, but they've got to move a little bit before they connect up with each other. That to just get incredibly fascinated about, okay, I'm in this plateau, and what's not connected? What's not happening that should be? Rather than how wonderful can it get? How can I increase my abilities? Because I think the whole process of learning Qigong is very wave-like. I think you go through periods where you're just making breakthrough after breakthrough, and frankly speaking, it's always fun, it's always exhilarating, it's always, boosting to all of a sudden, oh my God, it's working, and it's working better, and it's working better. But you also have to realize that on the other side, there are periods when everything inside you has to catch up with all that stuff. And that's when you just keep on practicing, and it can seem boring, or it can seem like it's dead, or it seems like, oh my God, no matter how much work I put in, you don't really move forward, but you are moving forward, because what you're doing is you're solidifying everything. Everything is disconnected, is getting connected, and then whenever that gets connected enough, which is an individual thing, then all of a sudden, the upward march starts again. And so I think that what I've seen in so many people is that low period, the valley, if you want to put it, that this seems to be the biggest challenge for people, and whatever does it for you. For me, I don't know. I always had the one thing, because I'm somewhat of a compulsive, or I'm what you might want to call the ultimate research type. I'm just always asked the question, what's missing? What could be there and what's missing? And so that always got me through the valley periods. And I think that is the one thing that I have noticed with most people I have talked to. I've been in this game 45 years. I've been teaching, I've been learning, I've been doing. the first time I did Aikido, as an example, which was fairly low level energy work, but I still got involved, was 1964. Through 1963, and it's now, what is that? That's like 45 years ago. And I met more and more people, but what I found out from all my friends who really got somewhere, all the people I met who really got somewhere, the one thing that they had was the ability to get just fascinated with minutiae and something like what's missing, like why is this not happening, and what do I have to do to make it happen, and bringing all your creativity and all your drive and all your ambition and all your ability to relax and just kind of sit and watch the river go by while you're trying to figure out what is this river doing. Those are the things that I think in the end produce great Qigong masters, or for that matter, honestly and truly, I think that's what produces great artists. That's what produces, that seems to be. But especially with something where energetic work can get so subtle, I think it's an absolutely mandatory ingredient.
And besides, when you're bored and you don't think that something is happening, there are always two options. One is to realize that, well, if life is going on, there is still some flow happening. There is still some chi flowing through your system, otherwise you wouldn't be alive. And just paying attention to that flow and learning how to attune yourself to that flow and how to be in the flow, perhaps is the greater thing in the universe.
It is a great thing, and maybe also another way of putting it, which to me is more what it's like practically on the ground as opposed to philosophically. When things are going well, you're feeling volts of electricity. When things go into a boredom period, you start moving down to millivolts and then to microvolts. But can you keep your interest consistent, even if let's say you've gone from 1,000 volts and now you're working with 1 volt? Because at the end of the day, there isn't really a difference between the stuff that's so incredibly spiky and what's just kind of normal and flowing along. And I think that's the type of humility, genuine humility, that doesn't just keep your head from getting too big. It actually just keeps you putting one foot in front of the other. Because very often people have to get some sort of giant charge which gives their ego a big, lights, camera, action, special effects. And yet most of the true wonder in life is actually not very special effectish. It's very small and it's very subtle and it's just very there.
It's everyday miracle that we often fail to notice and appreciate.
Sure.
Speaking of miracles, do you think that Qigong would also be able to miraculously help us somehow address the current economic downturn in this country?
Well, first of all, yes. Well, let's put it this way. I could say where I could see it doing it. The first one is this. Part of the reason that we're in the mess we're in right now is that with all the greed that was going on in the 90s and the 2000s, was always the idea you could get something for nothing, or you could get what I would call outsized results that, frankly speaking, if you had any sort of intelligence, you would realize not sustainable. Well, if there's one thing about Qigong it gives you is a sense of consistency, where I do think there is something that could be even more directly important for most people. I said the book that I'm having that's coming out, The Tao of Letting Go, in July, you can see it on my website, energyarts.com. There's a newsletter, and you'll get all sorts of stuff with it if you do that, because we're trying to launch the book, and I think Taoist meditation is not very known, so we're really trying to pull out all the stops that people know it. Is this: at this juncture, most people, or a lot of people, are getting depressed. They're getting paralyzed. They're getting, kind of upset because, well, I did everything right, but yet I'm basically being screwed to the wall by people who clearly didn't. That's a lot of stuff that's in you that if you can't let it go, it'll poison your insides. The more your insides get poisoned and you can't move forward with some sort of a positive attitude, the only thing is you're guaranteed is that things are going to slowly grind to a halt. And that basically is... the grinding to a halt is where you move from recessions to depressions. Whereas I think that if a lot of individuals would could let go of whatever happened inside them, even if they lost, God knows what they lost, right? Or they're going to have trouble getting a loan, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If they let go of a lot of the things that are basically being a drag on their system, it is amazing how, when that energy is released, how nature abhors a vacuum, ways to find solutions to things just start popping up, which were probably there all the time, but because your system was so clogged, you could never see it. So at the one level, I think it's for sure that if a lot of our politicians actually would meditate, they might get that, they don't have to be bought off by lobbyists and everything, and there might be some percentage of them who actually want to become politicians. They want to do something good. But there's all the fear, there's all the greed, there's all the demons people have inside themselves they can't let go. There's the need to be right. If these things can be let go, then people can move in positive directions. And when people can't let go of those type of things, they end up churning the same negativity endlessly. So in that sense, since Taoist meditation is all based on Qi, and since it's also meditation, I personally think that this book, The Tao of Letting Go, could give people an immense amount of space in their life. And from the point of view of the economic thing, if you take off the resistance in the system starts moving. If you're trying to ride a horse and you got, an elephant on the back of it digging in its heels, the horse is not going to go very far. So right. I think this stuff is terribly valuable. So all I can say is the Tao of Letting Go. You can see about it at energyarts.com. Sign up on the mailing list, find out what it's all about. And I hope it does some good, because honestly, it was a very difficult book to write. It's not easy putting out something that is, one of the major traditions in the world that virtually nobody knows about.
Well, how about some practical applications of energy arts in daily life? Would you be able to suggest or offer something? But practical, I mean, perhaps not simply listening to the flows of energy in the body.
I'll give you something that's terribly practical. And on my website, I have all these things about breathing. I have instructional tapes. I have just follow this and do it. When I got a PhD, at the time I got a PhD, the person who was my advisor, this is back in the 90s, happened to have been friends with a guy who was, because he's a professor from old days, who was on Clinton's, healthcare, whatever it was, his group. I forget, committee or something like that, right? And so he says, look, I'm going to, if I bring this guy in, because he's going to be visiting soon, this is part of when you do the orals. Okay, from what's in your PhD, from everything you've done, from all this research you've done, and all the stuff you did in the Orient, what is the one thing you would tell him for the American public? And I didn't have to think for 30 seconds. And I'm not looking at things that are esoteric. I said, I would teach the American public how to breathe well. Because if you want to take the one thing that you have control over, that will give you the most bang for the buck, that will produce the greatest benefit for every natural day of your life, is to learn how to really breathe well. Now, there's a lot of ways of breathing. I think the Taoist way is more practical. It'll energize your internal organs. It'll get your blood circulating better. It'll actually get more oxygen into your brain and do all the wonderful things oxygen do, but it'll do something more than that. It, over time, will start waking up your Qi. So that's what I would say from the things I have is learn how to breathe. On my website, energyarts.com, we went through an immense amount of grief to get those materials together because, as I said, when I did my PhD, I was asked one question. You can do one thing and one thing only. What did I teach the American public how to breathe? If there was some God somewhere says, look, I'll tell you what, I'll give you whatever you want and I'll kill you the next second. Honestly, I would simply teach the American public how to breathe because I think the idea of stopping war and everything like that, given the human condition, is asking a bit much. But if I could, I would personally be willing just to give up my life if everybody on the planet could just get how to breathe and get it boom, without even thinking for 30 seconds.
Do you think that people wouldn't know how to breathe if you
people
just allow them to breathe naturally?
People breathe lousy. The American Medical Association says it, and all they're looking for is if they're getting any oxygen. People do not know how to breathe. Period. 90% of the American public breathes, let's put it this way. If it were money, you absolutely would be homeless. And there's no, I mean, forget about, I can breathe or I'm not dead. That's a little bit like a child saying, I have 3 cents, I have money. It's a crazy statement. Most people don't know how to breathe, and I really do believe that would be the one thing, if they could do that would give them the greatest amount of benefit in their life for the effort they would put in. Period.
Well, any other suggestions or parting notes before we complete our hour? And any additional information that you would like to offer to our listeners?
You know, the only thing is that I got some really wonderful young people, because I'm very untechy, that actually got my website together and it's halfway decent. So all I can say is that there's an immense amount of very valuable information on it, and we're trying to do stuff to, open up the whole field of Tai Chi and Qigong and Taoism and meditation. That's been my goal from day one. And so what I would say is energyarts.com, energyarts.com. That's the website. And I think, honestly, I could sit here and talk for 10 hours, and the website's better.
I really appreciate you spending a whole hour sitting and talking and sharing a tremendous wealth of information and great ideas. And I just wanted to express my appreciation for taking this time to share your knowledge with us.
It's been my pleasure, and you've been a great host.
You have finished another episode of the talk show, The Secrets of Qigong Masters, that brings to you some of the top experts in Qigong, meditation, healing, and martial arts. Now I invite you to visit QigongMasters.com and dive deeper into the teachings of our amazing guests by downloading their multimedia products and becoming a member of our international community of like-minded people. This show is also brought to you by Academy of Qidao, offering Qigong coaching programs that integrate the ancient energy arts with the modern methodology of coaching. If you struggle with chronic pain, suffer from too much stress, want to boost your performance, or seek spiritual awakening, please go to QigongCoaching.com. There, you can receive top-notch coaching as well as professional training to become a certified Qigong coach yourself. That's right, if you're dreaming of making a decent living, doing what you love, and making a difference in the lives of many people worldwide, check out our programs that will help you transform your interest in energy arts into living your life in the flow.